I want to introduce Stephen Debique, who is an MPhil/PhD student at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, he is going to expose us today, well, certainly he has just exposed me, to what he calls open street mapping, or the Open Street Map, which apparently is an online community of individuals who volunteer information, geospatial information, and who are also able to pull down, as he will tell you, in 3 different ways. They are also able to cull information from the site. So you contribute and you also pull. And the end product, from what Stephen tells me, is often a map, which has downstream uses, urban planning, as he put it after the Haiti earthquake, you know, people being able to tell exactly what were the elements of geospatial infrastructure in a particular area. What were the houses, what were the buildings, what were the roads, access, etc. And Stephen's project, however, is to assess the importance of this in Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, everything is Facebook, Twitter, so we have a younger generation that is internet ready and seems to be able to think only in terms of the internet. This is an internet community, so there might be appeal for them. His research is not about what is done with this afterwards, but about exploring whether this will take off here. And as he puts it, the hows and whys of open street mapping. Okay, so I think he will tell us about that first, and then talk about its applications to Trinidad and Tobago and other developing countries where apparently it is not now commonly used. And I guess if he goes on later, he could look at the factors as to why the developed world will be using it, but not the developing world. So that may not be part of today. So again, without further ado, Stephen Debique. Okay, and the title is Crowdsource Free and Open Geospatial Data. Okay, Information Poverty Solutions for Trinidad.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Stout. Thank you, everyone, for coming. As Dr. Stout said, the title of my research project is Crowdsourcing Free and Open Geographic Data, Information Poverty Solutions for Trinidad and Tobago. I've just completed my literature review on this project, so that's what I'll be going through today, basically what the research problem is. And in talking about the research problem, I'll go over what is geographic data and information, the digital commons, prod users, Web 2.0, and the paradigm shift that actually encompasses these 3 things: crowdsourcing, and geographic information poverty in Trinidad and Tobago, and what that exactly means. I'll also be talking about my research question, and then I'll go over some key papers that I actually reviewed during my literature review. I studied quite a number of papers and books, but I'll just go through about 5 or 6 papers that basically helped me to develop a theoretical framework for understanding this problem and for coming up with identifying research questions. And then I'll also talk a little bit about some variables of interest that I'll try to analyze in my research project. And finally, I'll close and give you a review of what I went through. So my research area and topic has to deal with digital user production, Web 2.0, and the public domain. And basically that, I'll go through it more in depth as I go along, but this is what Dr. Stout was talking about earlier about wikis and Facebook. We're in the era now where most people contribute instead of it being a pull system where you only take data from off the internet. Now people are into pushing data. So they actually contribute their own data to private companies and non-profit companies. Also go through this topic is also a confluence of geographic information science and volunteer geographic information, as well as behavioral economics and social psychology. And it also has its application areas in participatory GIS. The topic is mainly concerning crowdsourcing, and crowdsourcing can be seen as kind of offshoot or actually a part of citizen science. So before we go more in depth into the problem, I just wanted to give a definition of exactly what I mean by data. And so data can be considered as symbols that represent selective measurements of phenomena. And whereas information is data that's created or selected in response to a question. So it's part of a context. So if I want to know something or I'm trying to make a decision, information is actually, data doesn't become information until you actually ask that question. And data and information is basically an answer to that question. And there's 4 distinguishing characteristics of geographic data. The geographic information is actually a representation of both spatial and non-spatial attributes, and it's selectively measured in time. And so the spatial part of it is the where, and the non-spatial attributes are a whole host of things, for instance, like census data. Geographic space is continuous. For any given point on the Earth, there's a measurement for that. And that's what we mean by it's continuous. It has a near spherical nature. Actually, the Earth is not spherical. It's considered a geoid. And that has issues for how we represent the where of the data. And then there's the distinguishing characteristics of spatial dependence is actually it's the way you actually interpolate data. And because we're limited by the continuous nature of the data, the spatial dependence allows us to actually conduct sophisticated spatial analysis, because what it basically means is that things are more related the more closer together that they are. And statisticians who study geospatial science, they actually have a measure for this, and it's called spatial autocorrelation. So what exactly could be answered by geographic data and technology? So it's the questions about space. So where are things at? Where are things located? Where are features in the Earth? Where are churches? These are things about space. Questions about attributes are concerned with things like where are people located, and who exactly is located where. Questions about time. When was the measurement taken? Then there's questions about concerning multiple entities, and this is more when you get more into the first group of questions are kind of simple, and then the second questions are more complicated. So spatial relationships, like does one feature contain another feature, and attribute relationships such as is a certain disease related to where another feature is located, or where a river is, and things of that nature. And then temporal relationships are relationships to do with time, and how features and spatial data changes as time goes on. Applications of geographic data and technology are many. Dr. Stout touched on a few in her introduction, and I'll probably go through a few of these. Public health is one, emergency and disaster management, social justice and community empowerment, crime fighting, and environmental monitoring. So this is actually a map. It's very old. It's not a modern use of GIS, but it's actually it is geographic information science. It's just done in 1854 by Dr. John Snow, and it's basically a map of cholera incidences. And using this map, and it's actually a very classical example. Using this map, he was able to find what was the cause for the cholera outbreak in London at that particular time, and most of the incidences were clustered around a certain water point, and they were able to understand that based on him mapping the incidences of cholera, where it actually where it was that the disease originated from. This is a very recent example. And it's actually an application of OpenStreetMap to give you more of something that's concrete about OpenStreetMap. This is actually a map of Haiti. When the earthquake happened, Haiti actually had they had maps. They weren't exactly, I'm not sure how updated they were, but they had maps. But what happened when the earthquake happened, and this is something that could happen here, there was no way to actually get the data because it wasn't shared and it wasn't freely available, and it was located in a central location. So when the earthquake occurred, they had no idea where people were. They had no idea. The rescue teams had no idea how to navigate because they weren't from Haiti, and things of that nature. And using OpenStreetMap, volunteers were able to map out via aerial imaging and on the ground using GPS devices. We're able to map out the whole area of Port-au-Prince, and the output of which is what you see here. And using this map, they were able to rescue people, deliver aid to various locations that were needed. They also collaborated via Facebook and Twitter to find out where people were, because even though the earthquake occurred, the mobile phone system actually was still operational. So people were able to not only use the mobile applications they had with Facebook and Twitter, they were able to SMS in and things of that nature. This is actually a picture of Kibera, Kenya. It's the third largest slum in the world. At one point, they estimated that it had 1 million people in it, but there was not. If you looked on any of the maps, including Google Maps, it was nothing there. It was almost as if nothing was there, and it basically left these people with no way of communicating what was in their community, what was going on in their community. They weren't included in any of the urban planning that was occurring. In fact, they just were going to knock down their houses without any input from the local community. And a man by the name of Michael Maron, who I'm actually interviewing for my research, and I've been speaking with him back and forth via email, and he's also a founding member of OSM, OpenStreetMap, and he's a foundation member. He went here with someone else, and they actually trained people in Kibera, Kenya, to use OpenStreetMap, and they were able to map out the whole of the community, including where all the mosques and the churches were, and different where all the water stations were, different things that were needed in order for the community to be empowered to speak with the government about what things they needed in their community. And an offshoot of it, the people there actually became so good at it that they started using it in ways which more developed nations use GIS. Like one thing they used it for was for crime planning, and they actually spoke to individuals from the community about where were the spots where girls were being raped or sexually abused, and they were actually able to see where hotspots were and communicate this to the authorities, and the incidences of rape were actually things like sexual harassment and things like that were decreased by the use of this map. And they're continuing to use this map and develop it further. And that's one of the things also about crowdsourcing and OpenStreetMap, is that as things change, you're able to update the map yourself. And that allows it to be continuously updated, and as features change, you're not left out in the dark when something changes, because the local knowledge is incorporated into it. So, as I go on to, as I said, is the research project is kind of confluence of different topics. So now I'm trying to give you more of an idea of what I mean by a paradigm shift, and part of that, and the picture is kind of meant to be provocative, I guess. And part of that is the whole thing about copyright, and how copyright. And I knew recently there was a talk here about copyright and things, and intellectual property rights, but copyright and how it actually can be. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have copyright, but how it can actually devalue freedom and actually devalue the public domain, which actually is very helpful to the communities. So traditionally, and I'm only speaking about copyright here, and patents and trademarks, those are other topics, even though they're all grouped under intellectual property rights. Traditionally, texts and information goods that would fall under copyright law were freely shared. I mean, the only really type of restrictions were kings and who didn't want information out, so they would basically impose laws, and people actually wrote it was actually something that was valued. Like, they wrote commentaries on books, and sometimes people would gather information and write compendiums. And the first time when copyright actually came into existence arguably was in England, and it was the Statute of Anne, and it was the copyright of 1709. And the other two bullet points there is just these two laws are actually they're global laws, international laws, and they're very actually uniform. They don't really allow much leeway. So you basically have a very homogeneous set group of intellectual property laws across the whole world, including what some people call the global South, which has implications for our economic growth, because back to the Statute of Anne, since England was kind of like the first person to do this, and America is now actually the one who pretty much pushes these two international laws that you see in the bullet point 3 and 4. America actually didn't, at one point in time, America actually didn't acknowledge England's copyright. They pretty much did what's seen here. They copied, and it was actually the founding fathers actually this kind of they had a utilitarian view of copyright. Like, copyright is there to allow. Well, this was their view, because France had a kind of different view of it, but the English and American view was that copyright was there for the public good, and it allowed people to actually to produce works. So, like, authors and things like that, they didn't have copyright. The view was, as if it didn't have copyright, then people wouldn't actually produce information goods. And so the changing paradigm that I'm speaking of kind of started with the Free Software Foundation and the Free Software Definition, which was first written in 1986. And the Free Software Foundation basically is mainly speaking about one type of information good, which is software. But as I'll show you next, the scope has widened to include almost all information goods. And so the freedoms are basically the freedom to run the program for any purpose, the freedom to study how the program works and change it to make it do what you wish, the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor, and the freedom to improve the program and release your improvements to the public so that the whole community benefits. So it's basically the freedom to use, the freedom to reuse it, redistribute it, share it, and the freedom to change it in ways that you like. The second part of the whole, what happened basically very right after 1986 in the 1990s, early 1990s, was Tim Berners-Lee and his whole concept of the World Wide Web and hyperlinks and things like that. And that created what we know as the web today. And now it's basically, we're actually kind of beyond Web 2.0, but now it's where we're having widespread peer production and sharing. Because with the web, with the emergence of the web, what happened was we now have a situation where information is basically, the marginal cost of information is zero. It's both non-rival and it's non-excludable, so it's a public good. So with that, with the marginal cost of information being zero, it's cheap to produce, and it's basically, people don't understand why they can't share it, because it's my use of it doesn't exclude you from using it. And I can't stop you from using it either. I can't make you pay for it either, because of things like Nutella and the file sharing, online file sharing. And so this is how basically a quote from the Open Knowledge Foundation, and basically showing you how the paradigm shift started out in software, grew to works on the internet. Now it's just now people are understanding that the openness of knowledge is important, and it's actually been shown in a study that when data, and like for instance, an example would be data. When data is released and it's open and it's free for use and it's free to distribute and it's free for reuse, it actually increases the value to the society. And it was shown that when America released geographic information, because this study was actually speaking about the whole value of the public domain, but most of the examples that was brought was on geographic data, because it has a lot to do with government and democracy and things of that nature. It actually showed that it was 10 times the value was over the proprietary alternative in Europe. So crowdsourcing is the outsourcing of a task to a large group of people, normally solicited through the World Wide Web. And this occurs in corporations use it, like Flickr. Some of you may have used Flickr. And nonprofit organizations use it as well. And here the picture on the right is the logo of Wikipedia. And to speak a little more, Wikipedia is established. It's actually a very good example of the power of crowdsourcing. Wikipedia is basically a product of crowdsourcing. It was established in 2001, and in 2008 had millions of articles. And today, I'm sure no one in this room is unfamiliar with Wikipedia. Anyone is free to edit, contribute, and use it. The content is open. Many people anecdotally talk about the quality of Wikipedia, but actually empirical studies have shown that Wikipedia is actually Wikipedia's quality is actually comparable to the Encyclopedia Britannica and other encyclopedias. So OpenStreetMap is a project to build a free geographic database of the world. It was started in August 2004 by a British programmer by the name of Steve Coase, who actually works for Microsoft now for Bing Maps, Bing, their mapping outlet. And it's a wiki-like system that anyone's free to edit, contribute, and use. So it's basically going back to the Wikipedia example that I was speaking earlier, and a lot of comparisons are drawn between OpenStreetMap and Wikipedia, except that instead of articles that you're crowdsourcing here, it's actually geographic data. And part of that is that people actually have to get away from their computer in order to contribute this data. And it's a manifestation of volunteer geographic information, which is a term, coined by a Professor Goodchild, who's a GIS expert. And basically, I wanted to kind of give you guys an understanding of what he means by volunteered and what I mean by crowdsourcing. So this is a GPS unit. It's about 100 Canadian dollars. There's 3 ways you can contribute to OSM, OpenStreetMap. And one is to actually take this GPS and log. You basically walk around with it, or drive around, or bicycle around with it, and log what the term is GPS tracks. And you take the GPS tracks and you actually, I mean, it's more complicated than what I'm saying, but it's not very hard. And you basically take the GPS tracks and you use that in order to upload it to the OSM servers and create the end product of the map. And the other 2 ways that you can
this is a model of this one. Pardon? So maybe we can order something.
So very GPS.
No, but model, you need one of those GPS.
you can open it if you would like.
This was a file format which is easier to use.
But this is a GPS data log, so
There's different models. There's data loggers. There's ways to use the GPS navigation, the ones that people are actually familiar with. Yeah, but that one's actually used for developing maps. You know, the other.
You have to buy some sort of connection to one they have in cars.
Yeah, it basically what it have to have like some type of USB cable or whatever. And that's another one. That's a different model.
How is this one work?
You turn it on, and the button there that's on it is actually, when you press the button, you basically collect a waypoint, what they call a waypoint, which is if I say I want. Has less features.
But it seems to be capturing messages you will have to put in more.
Well, that one captures voice, which is very useful.
Voice?
Yeah, which is why
also you will be articulated as
like I can say, well, this is UTT, or I can say this is a street, or things of that nature.
But it also means then that you could be inaccurate in what you are articulating, in which case what it captures is really your subjective view of what you're seeing, whereas the first one is a satellite, it would be satellite information.
Right. Well, it collects satellite information as well.
This
but
one
you
does,
see, yeah. But the thing is, that's the point of it being crowdsourced, because it's actually using local knowledge. you still have to input what the features are. Even though you get the geographic coordinates from the satellite, you have to input what those features are, what the names are, what the roads are, whether it's a one-way street, or, if you're mapping the public transit system, where the bus stops are, whether it has handicap.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if it has handicap facilities, if, what time, things like that. And so the two other ways that you can contribute to OpenStreetMap is via aerial imagery. And there's actually an effort called grassroots mapping, which tries to use hot air balloons and made out of garbage bags and stuff like that to take photos, aerial photographs of countries such as ours, which when they use the satellites, the clouds cover the area, so we're not able to use the aerial imagery as much, and a lot of it is expensive, cost restricted. But for areas where they do have aerial imagery, or in the case of Haiti, when there was a disaster and people are actually, but you don't want to wait for that point. What I'm actually trying to say is people are willing to give out the aerial imagery, or they took new aerial images. The third way is by using local knowledge based on, but this third way you actually have to have like an outline of how the area looks, and then using like a map, a paper map printed out, you can actually jot down what the streets and what different features are, and then upload that information to OSM. So that's another way. So it's more than just stating what the features are. There's different ways to contribute, and you don't actually have to ask. Have to go as far as having a GPS to contribute to the OpenStreetMap community. And the last one is this spatial data infrastructure, was a term coined by the National Research Council in America. It's actually spread out across the globe. It is basically a term that encompasses a number of things. And I say here, it's an aggregate of agencies, technologies, people, and data that together constitute the nation's mapping enterprise. And according to Goodchild, he actually believes that, and many other people currently, because this is more recent research, believe that efforts like OpenStreetMap can be fused together with national mapping agencies, for instance, in our current country, to support a spatial data, a hybrid spatial data infrastructure that includes volunteer geographic information, so crowdsourced from local people or non-experts, although, as I'll show, experts actually contribute to it.
And so finally, I get to the point of all these different things I've been talking about, and talk about the actual research problem. And so there's by information poverty, a professor at UE actually coined this term. He's a GIS professor as well. He calls it the lack of freely available data and information for decision-making purposes. And this is why you want the geographic data information, is to help decision-making and to create actionable intelligence. Because we basically live in a world where we need to have as much information as possible in order to make better decisions. And Goodchild said, in reality, world mapping and I added, and hence the collection of geographic data has been in decline for several decades because of one of the reasons is the expense of collecting the data. And so, I just wanted to bring the point home by saying in 2011 there was actually a call by a national a non-governmental agency called MapCorps GIS Corps, I'm sorry. And they asked for to collate spatial data concerning administrative districts, transport networks, what we were speaking about, and population data for the Caribbean basin. And this was for purposes of emergency management, because basically they saw what happened in Haiti, and they didn't, and other places as well, like Japan, and because of climate change, and this is basically a sustainability issue of not having this information in an accessible manner, i.e. the web. And the picture is basically a picture of Haiti, what happened in Haiti. So is OSM and by extension VGI part of the solution to information poverty? So you have, yes, the solution is in developing a professional workforce, having educational outlets, and using new technologies like remote imaging, remote sensing, and aerial imagery and things of that nature. But at the same time, we can also leverage this whole new paradigm shift towards user content creation and volunteer geographical information to actually augment what we're trying to do in the professional realm. So, and this has kind of been termed a patchwork because of the expense of gathering all this geographic data, and you just can't do it all from a government standpoint. They said that they rather make the processes and create an atmosphere where people will actually, and different groups, and Professor Goodchild said VGI would actually patch up the areas where they weren't able to gather geographic data. Like in the United States, they actually use private enterprises to collect flood data, which is something we know very well here too. And part of the problem here in the Caribbean is that there's just a general lack of contribution. I mean, at one point in a few years ago, someone actually said this on pledgebank.org that if he spends an hour contributing to OpenStreetMap for the Caribbean islands, then basically he'll donate, and he also wants other people to do it too. So that's the point of pledgebank. And so why so poor, and how do we change is basically the problem that I'm trying to solve here. So on to the research question.
I'd like you to finish quickly so we have some time for questions.
Okay. Okay. So this is just a list of some of the literature, as I was stating before, that kind of helped me to develop a theoretical framework. And the theoretical framework is basically these points here. Both access and digital skills are important. So basically this has to do with the digital divide. Trinidad actually is pretty well off in terms of access. There's actually I think it's 141 mobile phones for every 100 person in Trinidad. And it's somewhere between 50 and 60% of the people in Trinidad have access to broadband internet. So we're doing pretty well. But the one area where I haven't really seen any investigation is in digital skills. And this is because there's actually been a whole reconceptualization of what the digital divide is. Most of the time people have kind of focused on the access, and now they're going towards digital skills and other things which like local content, which like you'll see on the internet. There's only a few, we speak English, so we don't really realize it, but there's so many different people that don't speak English. What about content for them? This is also part of the digital divide as well. Eleanor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize actually wrote a paper on how the Nobel Prize she won was for traditional commons and how people manage traditional commons. But she wrote a paper on knowledge or digital commons, and she has a framework called the IDA, and that kind of helped to inform me about how to look at the social science aspects of the digital commons, which I was speaking about. The motivating factors are many, and include such things as some people contribute VGI for money. There's private enterprises around VGI, companies like GeoIQ and others, Geofabric, and other companies around this effort in VGI. People do it for altruism, a number of different motivating factors, which was documented by Budhat Hockey. Not sure if I said his name right. VGI contribution is done by a multitude of stakeholder groups. And so basically this was kind of what I was alluding to earlier. There's a various amount of people who contribute, and this has ramifications on the how and the why they contribute and the motivations that they have. There's, like I said, there's private enterprises, there's individuals who may be experts or they may not. They may be they may be what some people termed of zealots, which are people and they've empirically they've documented that 2% of the people signed up to be contributors to Wikipedia actually contribute, I think, something like 75% of the work on Wikipedia. And some people, and there's been many studies, but some people actually said it's less. And then the final thing, which I'm just trying to go through real quick, is basically points from economics and social psychology, which have ramifications for my research question. So these are the research questions that I basically formulated. What factors affect the willingness of Trinidad and Tobago citizens to contribute to OpenStreetMap? How does personal value and goal setting, which are part of social psychology and behavioral economics, affect the willingness of Trinidad and Tobago citizens to contribute to OpenStreetMap? How does the opportunity cost of participation affect the willingness to contribute to the OSM community in Trinidad and Tobago? What are the motivating factors for current contribution to Trinidad and Tobago in the OSM community? So the first three are basically about the willingness. So these are people who, so I'm trying to figure out how do we solicit contribution to the OSM. And the last three are actually the people who are already contributing. Why aren't they contributing more? Because there's actually a lack of contribution currently for most Caribbean countries. Barring Haiti, which was actually mapped by outsiders who came and volunteered. And so how does personal value and goal setting affect actual contribution to Trinidad and Tobago in the OSM community? And how does the opportunity cost of participation affect the actual contribution to the OSM community in Trinidad and Tobago? And these are some preliminary conceptual variables of interest are these here. The contribution, potential contribution, internet access, socio-demographics, geographic expertise, information on the importance to Trinidad and Tobago, goal setting, and the method of contribution. And so, in summary, I spoke to you a little bit about the geographic data, its importance, and the VGI, the lack of contribution to VGI in Trinidad and Tobago and wider in the Caribbean, some key literature, and the theoretical framework based on this key literature, and then the specific research questions of my project and variables of interest.